Once upon a time there was an island filled by happy, carefree and productive people who exchanged their bounty at the weekly market. Their lives were simple and there was enough for all. One market day a stranger appeared and said, "How primitive! Have you no money?" "Money," the people said. "What is money?" "Money is a wonderful thing," the stranger said. "It will change all your lives for the better. No more complicated bartering, no more lengthy dialogues, no more arguments on market day, and it will make you so much richer." "Great," said the people. "How does it work?" "Aha," said the stranger. "Instead of swapping cattle for clothing, you buy what you want with money. Money represents the goods you produce." "How do we get this money?" the people asked. "Bring me a cowhide and I will make you all the money you need," said the stranger. This the people did and went home most excitedly. The next day when they returned, the stranger was sitting under the tree with a huge pile of leather discs in front of him. "Here is your money. You may borrow as much as you like," said the stranger, "as long as, at the end of each year, you repay me 1 extra disc for each 10 you borrow. For I invented money, and so it's only fair. And to safeguard my money, loaned out on trust, I will hold the deeds to your property as security until the debt is repaid." And so the people borrowed according to their desire. But at the end of the year, they discovered that there weren't enough discs to repay everyone's debts, because for each 10 discs loaned out, an 11th was owed, which had never been created. So while some could repay, others could not, and lost everything.
I want my money. I want my money. I want my money. That's what I want. I want my money. I want my money. I want my money. That's what I want.
It's money, 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 isn't it? Whether you're going to get enough to get through to the next year, whether you're going to be around. If we don't get enough money out of the harvest, well, we're not here till next year because you can't get an overdraft from the bank because we don't have the equity. Machinery doesn't count.
I want my money. I want my money. That's what I want.
If you borrow $1,000 at 12%, and then it goes up to 20%, your earning capacity is not increased. The price of your end commodity hasn't increased, but your interest has. Your repayments have increased. How do you do it?
That's what I want. Give me loads of it. I want my money. I want my money. I want my money. That's what I want.
It's not right, you know. They're prepared to let them borrow the money, but then again, they're not prepared to let them spend that little bit extra time and get the money back to them.
Convenient career, conveniently blessed, conveniently working and conveniently stressed.
In Australia, right across the community today, I mean, even people in the city who are having trouble with their home payments and things like that. I mean, the instances of family breakups are high, and I'd say, this is just my estimate, but I reckon 9 times out of 10 there'd be a financial problem, has been the root cause of it.
And then the bank man says, "How's it doing, Joe?" I say, "I'm doing fine." Say, "What's the goal?" He says, "You're behind on your housing loan and your credit line." Well, it's almost gone. I said, "Don't give me no job, man. I'm in control. I want my cash now. I want my fat bankroll. I want my money. I want my money. I want my money. Lots of it. That's what I want now. I want my money. I want my money."
The world economy is in deep crisis. People everywhere are hurting badly. Yet governments the world over seem incapable of addressing the situation. The public are becoming more cynical as one election follows another. Where there is no compulsory voting, the number who go to the polls is dropping. Many young people don't bother to register as voters. They feel the process is meaningless, or that elections have no bearing on policies.
As a bloke said, it don't matter who you vote for, so the government still gets in.
Some commentators have suggested that in the face of such cynicism, the democratic process itself is in danger. So far, the world has only come up with 3 alternatives for the complex matter of running societies. The first of these is anarchy, where there is no government at all. Examples in history show that anarchy is of a temporary nature. With no legal or constitutional restraints, it is only a matter of time before the strongest seizes power, making way for the second alternative, totalitarian dictatorship. The ruthless nature of such regimes necessitates the perpetuation of force on dissenters of any kind, hence the loss of freedoms. Again, history has shown that tyranny eventually breeds sufficient resistance for breakdown, although this process usually takes longer than it does under anarchy. The last alternative, democracy, has given mankind its most sustained periods of freedom and growth. In the words of Winston Churchill, democracy is the worst form of government in the world, except for all the rest. But in all these forms of government, there is one constant factor more important than all the others, yet seldom analysed. That factor is money. Newspapers and current affairs programs, it is true, are full of discussions about economics. But the issues under discussion are almost always on effects, not causes. We are never short of material on hunger and poverty, collapsing industries, bank foreclosures, food stockpiles and stock market crashes. We have opposing views on tariffs, exchange rates, devaluation and revaluation, free market theories versus protectionism, until the mind of the non-technical listener is reeling. But what is money? And how is it created? What is debt? And how does it begin? Who owns the world's debts? What part does money and debt play in human affairs? Let's take, for example, the crisis facing the new President of America, Bill Clinton.
Clinton is faced with the fact that $200 billion out of revenue simply pays interest on the debt. And if he wanted to get that through to the American people so they understood the true position, he'd send a team of inspectors out to knock on every door in the United States and say to the householder, now, I've come to collect the interest on Washington's debt for this week, which amounts to $2 per head every day. So how many people in this house? A mother, father, and 2 kids. We want $8 a day for this week, which is $56 for the week. That's your share of the interest bill on Washington's debt, and we're going to come back next Monday for another $56 ad infinitum. Now, the thing would last about a fortnight because the whole place would explode, obviously. And people would say, well, how long is this going to go on? And the answer would have to be forever, because none of that money is used to repay debt. It is simply servicing the thing with interest. Now, obviously, the whole nation would explode, but it doesn't see it in those sort of terms, as graphically as that. Instead, it sees it in a price level that is always out of reach of the pay packet, or returns for commodities which are lower than that which is needed to cover overheads. So there's this perpetual, stressful cost struggle that every American is faced with, which he can't identify, and he's not sure who to blame for it, but which basically now is simply carrying an ever-expanding load of debt.
Washington's debt has its counterpart across the world. The debt of third world nations in mid-1992 exceeded $1.3 trillion. Conditions now demanded by the International Monetary Fund for further loans are harsh, and the third world pays more in debt service year by year than it receives in aid from industrial nations, which have a major debt crisis of their own. The events in the Australian state of Victoria at the close of 1992 is one example of the widespread problem.
The difficulty with which the incoming government was faced was this. The previous government, just before it lost office, had increased taxes in Victoria and had reduced the amount of revenue by $500 million. In other words, increasing taxes did not deliver increased revenue. It simply knocked over another group of taxpayers and industries, resulting in diminished returns. In other words, you can't squeeze more blood out of a stone than actually exists. So the next step was to go through what was left of public assets in Victoria to see what could be sold, which is done now by every incoming government under the label privatization. We need to sell state assets to try and service the debts that we've got ourselves into. And having gone through what was left and come up with a program of privatization, we're going to sell power stations, and we're going to see if we can sell prisons, and we're going to sell a number of other public utilities. There was still not enough to balance the books of Victoria over the next year. So the Victorian Premier flew into the federal capital, Canberra, and had to negotiate permission to borrow more money, another $2.8 billion to tack onto the debts that already exist, under the plea that we need to do this in order to survive. So everything was done except face the real issue, which is that unless some way is discovered of getting the debt situation under control, in the end, there is nothing left to sell, there is no more money to tax, and you can't continue borrowing forever, and therefore the problem is not really being dealt with.
And so we can see the dilemma of governments across the world, how to tax more widely, and how to cope with the fact that an increasing percentage of their taxation revenue is spent servicing government debt, instead of being allocated to community needs. But this is never explained to the ordinary people in our urban and rural communities. Instead, they are faced with the problem of their income being less and less able to pay for their daily necessities. While the real costs of production are being continually reduced, they are being replaced by a new cost: debt service. Not only does it throw the consumer out of work, but it destroys the industries which should and could employ them. Farmers in the Western world have faced a crisis in the second half of this century which has decimated tens of millions of them. In 25 years, France's farming population has dropped from 23.7% of the active population to 8.4%. In Britain, the percentage dropped from 4.8 to 2.7%. In former West Germany, from 15.7 to 5.5%. In the United States, an average of 80 farmers left the land every day between 1920 and 1950. From 1950 to 1980, however, the average exodus increased to 300 every day. As the exodus escalates into the 90s, it is leaving more and more in control of the multinational food cartels. And what about Australia? Well, the picture is just as grim.
Back in 1940, when we were at war, and most able-bodied Australians were overseas in uniform, we had around about, I think the yearbook says, 252,000 farmers, give or take 100. At the end of the war, as men got back out of the services into Civilian Street, we opened up a number of schemes for potential farmers. We had soldier settlement, and we had closer settlement schemes, and by the 60s, the number of farmers had built up to round about 292,000, I think. And then we moved into the first cost squeeze, result first of all of a drop in wool prices, and then the result of a major drought in the eastern states. And we lost 30,000 farmers over a 10-year period. And this was regarded as so bad that in 1969 conferences were held right through Australia on how to deal with the tragic loss of farmers. And the argument was put forward for the first time: there is a small number of farmers in Australia who are too small to survive, and we need to reconstruct those out of the industry, round about 10%, which would have been 25,000 farmers. Having done it once, this will stabilize rural industry, and from there on it will be prosperity for the remaining 220,000 farmers. And so for the first time, two slogans came in. One, get big or get out, which has echoed through Australia ever since. The second one was, those that have to leave, let's allow them to leave the land with dignity. From that time until 1992, 1993, we have lost now just on 130,000 farmers, and they're going all faster than ever before.
When you come home, you'll hand me those wheat.
Errol and Maxie Hoskinson have been on the land all their lives. They grow wheat near the little town of Kaikoura in central western New South Wales. According to Maxie, it used to be a good life back in the 50s and 60s. Today, things are very different.
About 3 years ago, we delivered wheat to the silo. It was so many dollars a tonne. An announcement came over the wireless. It was down to $50 a tonne. We didn't get enough that year to cover our costs. Now, what is a farmer supposed to do? He's efficient, he advances with the times, and then the hierarchy do a thing like that to people. People aren't spending on their fencing or repairing things. You just look around, you don't put a coat of paint on something that needs it, and you might have gone out and put a new fence up. Well, now you just prop it up with a few more iron posts. A majority of people would be flat out not having a debt today. Now, when the banks deregulated, they encouraged people to buy. Well, you didn't have to, of course. They didn't screw your arm to sign, but that was the encouragement to go out. Get big. That's what the politicians told us. Get big or get out. And that's where a lot of people got in trouble. People borrowed, some at 12, some at 13, some at 14, but they didn't give them a let out when interest rates started to rise. I know from one fact that interest rate in February was 14.75%. By May it was 16%. And people were saying, well, lock in now, you know, it's going to keep on going. But the banks wrote and said, they're quite sure bank rates are going to come down, you know. By September they were 19%. Now where's the let out for anybody to get out in that situation? You're locked in. There's no way you can get out. So then it kept on going up to 22, 23, some 25, 28. There's still people paying 25% today, and I can't believe that. That's the hard part. Now those people have worked their butts off for years, producing for Australia food that we need. And if they're not there, the next generation's got a big enough problem, but it's the generation after. Is there going to be an Australia that we call Australia, as we grew up in it? Is it going to be here if we don't get up and fight? But who do we fight? And that's what we've got to find out.
The nearby town of Kaikoura used to be a thriving little community. There was a school, a pub, and several shops. They have all been closed.
It's a shame to see the country going backwards and kids have got to go away from home to work. We've been a community, the kids have born, bred here, gone to school here, and then they're up and leave.
On Kangaroo Island, off the South Australian coast, Libby Kelly and her husband Ian have been raising sheep all their lives. In 1990, the Australian government removed the floor price on wool. Almost overnight, the price dropped dramatically.
When the floor price went completely, it was fairly devastating because we had budgeted for using that floor price as it was originally, the 800 cents, and then when it came down things looked rather precarious, and then when the floor price went completely it was devastating. Personally, we had to work through a grief situation of perhaps having security and then not having security, and it is a grief process because you feel devastated, you feel down, and you feel well, you just lose all self-confidence. And I felt I wanted to sit down and have a ball every now and again. I didn't, because there was other things to keep going. There was still stock to look after, there was still family to feed.
In a rather cruel offer of compensation, the government promised to pay $2 a head for farmers to kill their sheep. Right across Australia, the slaughtering began. On their property near West Wyalong, Janine and Don McRae shot over 2,000 of their sheep.
Well, this is the pit that we buried our sheep in, and we just set up the portable yards over there and right next to it, and we just shot them. We just got the guns and just got in with them and just kept shooting until they were all dead. You know, the sheep are just all in the yard, and there's just nowhere for them to go. It's just like a whole heap of people in a football ground or something, and there's someone in there shooting, and there's nothing that anybody can do. There's nowhere for you to go. It's really, really awful. And it always upsets me just to talk about it. I mean, I'll talk about it, but when I actually think of actually doing it, it just gets to me.
Just a few years ago, the McRaes used to hire 10 shearers and shear over 12,000 sheep. Those days are a thing of the past. At present, they only have 3,000 sheep. All the shearing is done by a couple of part-time local shearers and themselves. I'm standing in the shearers' quarters on the property of Don McRae near Gulgowie. The place is a fantastic building. It's solid, it's well made, it's built to last for decades. It's just empty, left here. The same with the shearing shed. The stands are empty. There's 7 or 8 stands, they're used 2. This is right throughout the country. Places that we've been, there are buildings like this, houses, air-conditioned, carpet, very good condition, just left there. No life at all. People want to work. People are quite capable of producing really well. There's all this here, there's all this potential, all this commitment, just lying here, falling to bits. Both Don and Janine are working 16-hour days, and the stress is putting enormous strain on the family.
A lot of families break up. I mean, it creates an awful lot of stress between the husband and wife, for example. You hear so many stories. The bank manager will ring up, they'll just keep ringing, and they'll often ring the wife up, and then of course the husband comes home and the wife's really upset and the bank manager's rung, blah blah blah. And
we had a friend rang up last night and he's in troubles with the bank. Just this last month he had another $1,800 whacked on for extra interest. They've taken their extra interest on there, but they haven't given any leniency. He's got days to get his house into order.
It's a combination of things, and the fellows tend not to talk about it, and it builds up, and then they, go and commit suicide. That's the worst scenario, and that's happening. I mean, we've had suicides in this district and in this whole region, and it's really quite sad because it just gets to the point where the fellows usually feel that there's no other way out.
I have a sort of a theory that if you're in millions of dollars debt to a bank, that's their worry. But if you're only $100,000 debt to the bank, that's your worry. They can get it out of you where they can't get it out of the great big, the big bickies around the place.
It's not just the primary industries that are suffering from the debt burden. In the inland town of Narrandera, Peter Royal's seed cleaning business has been teetering on the edge of takeover by the banks.
The very disappointing thing I find about the banks is that when you go to the bank and you borrow money and you sign a contract at, say, 13% or whichever percentage it may be, and within a period of 12 months or 18 months, all of a sudden it's climbed to 27%. I think this is grossly unfair. After purchasing the machine, our interest rates climbed steadily to 27%. The commodity prices went down, which led us into a position that there was no work coming in, and we could not make payments to our bank, and we could not make payments on our brand new machines. So we put a proposal to them that following week that I would give $500 to the bank, the loans bank, and $500 to the development bank, explaining to the bank and the development bank that if the development bank decided to take the machinery because we could not make our payments, then the business just ground to a halt. At this time, my interest rates, which had now risen to 27%, were rapidly going past the value of anything that I had. And my equity was disappearing. So, on my own initiative, I went to the bank and I said, I'll do my best to give you another $500 on each of those payments. So it was $1,000 to the bank and $1,000 to the development bank. They accepted that wholeheartedly. It was only about a month later they came to me again and suggested I should increase my repayment. it's pretty depressing in as much that I've got 5 boys and not one of them are prepared to come here and put up with what I've put up with, or be prepared to put up with what I've put up with to earn a living. It's put an enormous strain on my own personal life with my wife, mainly because there'd be times we needed groceries and I would have to run around and try and borrow some money off of a friend, or run around and see a customer and see if he can give me $100 to get enough money so we can live for the week. It's been very, very stressful. It really has, for the last 4 years in particular.
In the big cities, Australian industries are experiencing the same ruthless pressure from the moneylenders.
I want my money, that's what I want. I want my money, I want my money.
Joe Bryant, a Sydney-based earth drilling contractor, has a dramatic story to tell of his experience with the bank.
Back in late '89, business was booming. The whole nation was booming in '89. And the banks made the first move in late '89 to restrict my credit. And then they fiddled the accounts, they created new accounts, transferred my bill facilities, cancelled bill facilities and transferred them to fully drawn loan accounts, which they had no authority to do. And that's when our problem started, because if you operate on credit, like most businesses do, if you have that credit cut off, you're in trouble. The position we were left in at that time, all the fat in our business was eaten up by high interest rates, plus our attempt to move from a declining industry into what we thought would have been an expanding industry. The bank at that time cut off our credit and left us without credit and without any fat. And they well knew what they were doing. And I think the whole nation suffered exactly in the same manner. Well, our turnover dropped in a very short period of time from what should have been $1 million a month to $200,000 a month. And it got down as low as $100,000 a month over the last 2 years. That's rather a large drop. When the bank moved our accounts around without my permission, I had a disagreement with the bank, and I decided at that point of time to start banking elsewhere. And I'd been banking with the Commonwealth Bank for 39 years. About 12 months later, I arrived back here one afternoon about 3 o'clock, and there was a couple of fellows in pinstripe suits standing in the office, and they informed me that they were the manager, the mortgagee in possession, or the agent for the mortgagee in possession. And we had a brief discussion, and they left. And I never heard then much from the bank until the Sunday between Christmas and New Year. At 4 a.m. in the morning, with the assistance of the police, they broke and entered this premises, cut all the locks off and took possession. And they left on the Sunday morning. When I found out this had happened, there was 14 TNT security guards and Alsatian dogs on the premises. I found it necessary to jump the fence and challenge the guards and their dogs, and came to the office and found the office had been burgled and records and our computer had been stolen. Most of this was documented on television because I made sure the major television stations were here when I found out this had happened. I challenged the police on their authority to act on bank authority, and I believe I won that challenge. I don't think the New South Wales Police will act in such a manner in future. During the week that the bank was in possession, or the agents for the bank was in possession, I was preparing the Trojan horse to go to Canberra. It was at the time of the George Bush visit, and the horse was painted up with New Wheat orders, not New World Order. When we returned, I decided to take the Trojan horse elsewhere, and we provided inside for people to stand in there with some handrails like the old trams might have had. We could stand inside, and when the horse came back on the following Sunday morning, a week later, at 7 a.m. in the morning, it had 34 of our people inside, and we had another 100 odd waiting up the street to do what was necessary to get back, and we surprised the guards by outnumbering them by smuggling these people inside the Trojan horse, which brought the myth to reality, in fact. Well, I went immediately to the court on the Monday, and we got orders against the bank to keep them out until such times as the dispute was settled in a proper manner through the courts. And until this point of time, the dispute is still before the courts and has not yet been settled, and we're still in business as a result of that action.
Right across the nation, as more and more people are driven from farms and the factories onto the dole queues, there is a corresponding loss of expertise. Skills that have taken a lifetime to develop are suddenly no longer in use. You know, there's something that's not quite adding up here. We keep being told that there is no work. Got 1 million unemployed. You come to a place like this, most of the areas that we've been through, there is more work than you can poke a stick at. In fact, in a lot of places, there's no one to even poke the stick. Nearly everything around here needs work done on it. There's thistle everywhere you can see. There's no one to clear it. There's shearing over there that needs at least another 3 people. There's no one to do it. The whole property needs at least another 4 people working on it all the time. There's windmills to be repaired. There's sheds over there that need maintenance. The house needs painting. There's work as far as you can see. So at one end we've got a never-ending line of work to be done. At the other end we've got a never-ending queue of people wanting to do work. So what's the missing link? Over this huge disparity between supply and demand, between producers and consumers, between willing but unable sellers and willing but unable buyers, is the huge and ever-growing expansion of debt, hanging over families, communities, nations, and the whole world. Faced with the impossibility of servicing this debt burden, governments around the world have opted for an enticing new proposal: debt for equity swaps. What does this mean? B.A. Santa Maria, an eminent Australian journalist, described it this way.
To choose one example only, US car companies purchased Mexican debt from US banks at a discount and then swapped the debt for cheap car plants south of the Rio Grande. Then there was Citibank's attempt to buy Mexico's national telephone company, thus helping to solve Mexico's debt problem by exchanging unrepayable debt for real assets. Numerous other privatizations are in process in Latin America. They're also on the menu in Yeltsin's Russia, where, by exciting a nationalist reaction, they're helping to destroy his government as well.
The problem is not just confined to third world nations. It's also happening right here in Australia.
A tremendous play is now being made on privatization, as though this is a bold new step forward towards free enterprise by freeing government instrumentalities out of public control and putting them back into a more competitive environment. The truth is that privatization is simply now a smokescreen for debt repayment, or as it's sometimes put, debt for equity swaps. In other words, governments are so indebted that they can only get debt relief by selling something overseas. Now, in the most absurd cases, you get a situation where, for example, the people in the city of Melbourne who ride on trams that have been there over 100 years now discover the trams are no longer owned by Victorians. They've been sold to Japan.
The craze for privatisation, or debt for equity swaps, raises perhaps the gravest question facing nations and peoples in the remaining years of the 20th century. Have the world's massive debts been created to the point where they can only be paid with the equity or ownership of each nation's assets, the industries of its people, the utilities providing essential services, and along with these, the freedom of its citizens?
To believe these vast sums, escalating astronomically through compound interest, will ever be repaid is the purest fantasy. But while they remain on the books, they furnish a useful formula for the transfer of real assets from debtors to creditors. Are we really to believe that the world's most acute financial minds have finished up in this highly advantageous position of exchanging book entries for real assets without a modicum of pre-planning? Somehow it seems hard to believe. Planned or not, the handover to international ownership is escalating. By the mid-80s, reported the Socialist International Committee on Economic Policy, the world economy was dominated by a handful of giant transnational corporations. Already some 200 such companies command a third of the world's total output of goods and services. These companies dominate the finance, trade and payments of the first and third world alike.
That was written in 1985. In the 8 years since then, the multinational takeover has become a feeding frenzy. Dozens of such takeovers of banks, industries, factories and farms occurring every day.
The international money system is being used to impoverish middle-income earners with debt, and thereby losing their assets to the elite who have got no limit on how much money they can get hold of. An example of a situation like that, I believe, is News Corporation. Rupert Murdoch, I think it was 2 years ago, Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation shares were selling for about $3.60. They had plummeted from $20 down to about $3.60. And everyone was saying, oh, he's following Bond, you know. Massive debt over the News Corporation. Obviously, he was another goner. And all of a sudden, the bankers, 300 banks or something, all agreed that we're going to support Rupert Murdoch again. And now the shares are back up to $24 a share. What a wonderful opportunity for anyone who knew what the New World Order was doing. I believe they got hold of Rupert Murdoch and said, see what we can do. We cut off the money supply to you, and you're finished. You'll finish up the same as Bond with nothing. Rupert Murdoch then sold his soul. He got all the money he wanted. His shares are now massive, and everyone thinks Rupert Murdoch's the most powerful man in the world. He's not. He's already had it demonstrated to him, because he obviously must have got a bit too cheeky. He's had it demonstrated to him that if they want to destroy him, they can. And Rupert Murdoch will do what he's told from here on. I was actually offered contract work just recently to prepare business plans under subcontract to a large chartered firm. And the purpose of the business plans is to investigate the feasibility of the close down of Australian businesses and the relocation of them to Asia. The sacking of Australians for the employment of Indonesians and Malaysians. And this is happening all over the country. And these business plans are even assisted by the federal government. 50% of the cost of preparing business plans are funded by the federal government. But what is happening is that Australia is being reconstructed into a third world nation, because the politicians have been bought by the international bankers. The international bankers control the world.
Convenient career, conveniently blessed, conveniently working and conveniently stressed. Respectable name, respectable street, respectable friends, I'm respectable in need. I got my money. I got my money. I got my money. That's what I want.
A sobering picture indeed. Governments and peoples around the world seem powerless in the face of this onslaught. Because there is one fact it seems they dare not face. That compound interest, or usury, is the root cause of the world debt problem. But if we could devise a new financial system on a different basis, it's possible to turn the situation around in a very short space of time.